Let's make it our business. A climate podcast that's about innovators, change makers, and entrepreneurs who are taking actions, creating solutions, and inspiring many. This podcast is supported by US Department of State, created by BBC Media Action, India.
Hello, my name is Saima. Welcome to Cool It Down, the podcast where we explore fresh ideas to cool down our planet, one innovation at a time. This time, we are diving into the world of waste innovation, specifically how your old jeans and discarded fabrics can find a new life. From transforming trash into trendy threads to the latest breakthroughs in textile recycling, we are unraveling the stories of those turning waste into worth. Today, we are thrilled to have Aditi Mayer with us, a leading voice in sustainable fashion and a powerful advocate for change at the intersection of fashion, craft, and climate awareness. Through her platform, Aditi inspires millions to rethink their choices in a way that honors both the environment and cultural heritage. She's not just redefining what it means to be an influencer, she's empowering all of us to make more conscious decisions. Welcome, Aditi.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Aditi, what inspired you to start your journey in sustainable fashion?
Yeah, so my journey in sustainable fashion began 10 years ago. I was 18 at the time and I was just starting my college career. And at that time, I learned about the Rana Plaza factory collapse. So Rana Plaza was an 8-story garment factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh that was producing for some of the world's biggest fast fashion names. Mm-hmm. And what struck me about the tragedy was structural cracks were actually found in this factory and it was ordered to evacuate. Right. But there was so much pressure from upper management to have workers complete orders that they were called back into work the next day when the factory collapsed. And for me at that time, I just remember this marked such a critical moment in the fashion industry to reckon with ethics, human rights, but also the scale and speed of production that set the conditions for this tragedy to happen. So at that time, I became interested in what the antidote to fast fashion might be, which led me on a journey of many different capacities. It began with learning more about the fashion industry here in my backyard in Los Angeles and getting involved with labor organizing and supporting garment workers here. It led me to go on a journey of discovering sustainable, ethical designers around the world who were prioritizing ethical, small-scale production that took the environment into mind. Right. And it led me to a storytelling journey as Instagram was quite young as a social media platform to share my learnings around the way.
What a wonderful storyteller you are. And, I've seen some of your videos. It's almost like you are connecting somewhere else. And it's a story that connects me to, the world around me. So it's fascinating. But Aditi, I want to ask you this about the influencers' role in responsible fashion. India contributes 8.5% of the world's textile waste. How do you think influencers, celebrities can encourage people to make more mindful choices in fashion?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about influencers or celebrity culture, I think what combines those two worlds is both influencers and celebrities are tied to an aspirational identity a lot of the time.
That's right.
So there's often a specific lifestyle, specific outfits that are presented that the audience is then fed as the aspiration. And so I think there's a lot of potential there to rewrite the story. So currently, when I think about the typical influencer identity, it's underpinned by not wearing the same outfit twice, a constant level of newness. And that's something I think we really need to challenge as a culture. So for me, I think instead of having the call to action be buy this outfit so you can, participate in a very specific trend that will likely change in a very short manner of time, I hope that the takeaways can be around themes of personal style, celebrating craft, or
Right.
thinking about sustainability in the specific context that that individual might exist in. So the hope is that we're not promoting a one size fits all culture, but rather allowing people to think more critically for themselves, to celebrate individuality, which is in many ways at odds with the current online landscape. But the hope is I could leave the internet better than I found it. So I hope storytelling can inspire this alternative paradigm.
Aditi, how difficult it is to convince, people out there that it's all right if you repeat your clothes. It's all right to, have less and enjoy it more. How difficult it is. Did you initially, when you started putting out videos, did you initially think that, oh God, I don't think it's going to work? Did you ever have that moment?
It's interesting you asked that because I think when I began sharing online, it came from such an organic space of sharing my own personal journey that I don't think the front and center goal has ever been shifting anyone's personal behavior. But what I realized is by showing an example through my own lived experience, it presents that alternative. So thankfully, I think I've been able to grow an audience that is on board with that mission. But I think I'm often centering my own creative process, my own inspirations as someone who identifies as a creative and the stories I want to put out there and hope it'll reach the right people. Because at the end of the day, I think the internet is a wonderful space to connect with community, but you also don't necessarily know what is translating across the screen. So I think it's really important for us to balance our own aspirations within that.
Very well said, Aditi. You often talk about the link between fashion, craftsmanship, and climate. How do you see influencers like yourself changing the fashion industry to be more sustainable and fair?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I think learning about the fast fashion industry is what inspired my own journey in this space.
Yeah.
And so the journey of finding the alternative meant that I had to understand that fast fashion as an industry is quite new. The idea of fast fashion began as recently as the 80s and 90s. When we think about this model of mass production, very quick turnaround time in terms of how that production is brought to consumers, and this micro trend cycle.
Yeah.
And so the alternative led me to our own culture, to South Asian culture, which has such a rich craft history.
Yeah.
And India is one example, but I think it's something we see throughout cultures around the world. So when I think about India, I think about how every region has a very specific, process when it comes to maybe embroidery, natural dyeing, so many different techniques that are tied to a social and ecological tradition. And so I think those are the types of brands that I want to champion. And so for me, it is about craft, but I think craft is so intimately tied to climate justice in the way it's sustainably produced and ecologically tied, but also the culture. And I think this trifecta of craft, culture, and climate is the intersection that I've found is the solution, and also allows people to see how sustainability might exist in their own cultures. Because again, craft traditions is something that the whole world has participated in its own ways. But doing that in a South Asian context has allowed me to connect deeper with my own elders and my own cultural identity, which I think has been really special.
Yeah.
And goes back to that idea I mentioned earlier about it's not about one size fits all, but rather going on this journey of finding how I can relate to the environmental movement, even through a medium like fashion.
Right. Aditi, what trends in fashion do you think are most promising for the future of sustainability?
The word trend is something I like to kind of challenge because it often is this idea of short-lived.
Yeah.
But I think the conversation in fashion that is growing exponentially is around sustainability, is about reuse, longevity, about personal style rather than something that's fleeting. And I think the fashion industry for a long time now is contending with the levels of waste that come out of it or the sheer level of production that it kind of champions. So I hope this is not a trend, but like a whole shift on a cultural level that we see hopefully coming. And I think it is coming slowly every day.
That's right. Aditi, my last question. So many people out there are listening to you, and they have this question in their mind: what can I do to, hop onto a fashion system which is sustainable? As an individual, how can I contribute?
Yeah, so I will give a few simple steps that anyone can do. The first one is quite easier than you would think, but maybe harder to do for some, and that's consuming less. I think our generation has been fed a speed of consuming that is not sustainable. And when we think about how our parents or grandparents may have consumed, it was a lot more intentional and a lot less in its scale. So the first step is maybe not what people want to hear, but it's what we need to do. It's consuming less. The second thing I would recommend is try to buy whatever you're craving secondhand, whether it is through a hand-me-down or a thrift store or something similar of that like. I think shopping secondhand is a really great way to use the resources that we already have in circulation rather than buying something new.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah,
we need to hear this more often.
I think so. I think it's an exercise. It's a muscle we all need to exercise a bit more. Yeah. So shopping secondhand is incredibly important. With that said, I think there's also a case for prolonging the life of the things we already own. Unfortunately, I think in the last generation, we often look at clothing as disposable. So we get rid of it without thinking about where it goes. So instead of doing that, can you mend it? Can you upcycle it into something else? If it's beyond a point of repair, maybe you can downcycle it and turn it into rags to clean the house. Everything I'm saying is not new as a concept. It's something, again, we've seen culturally. I think we've seen those old t-shirts turn into cleaning rags around the house. Yeah. But I think those are really resourceful ways to use the things around us that I encourage people to think about. So those are 3 simple steps that, are, I don't think, that difficult. But beyond that, if you are looking to champion sustainable fashion, look for designers in your locality. The internet has made the world a lot smaller, and I think if we have the opportunity to vote with our dollar to support those that are championing craft, culture, and sustainability, it's a really great way to wear your culture on your sleeve and also support those that are doing things against the grain in many ways.
So coming from someone who is encouraging us not to expand our wardrobes, is walking the talk, thank you so much, Aditi, for joining us today. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, if you're yet not convinced, then hear Professor Parikshit unpack the science behind how textile waste has an immense effect on climate change and why more entrepreneurs are the need of the hour. A very warm welcome to this podcast, Professor Parikshit. We call it Cool It Down because that's what we intend to do.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this.
Parik, could you explain how textile waste, when it ends up in landfills or is burned, affects the climate and the environment?
Yes. Look, it is a very broad topic, but I'll try to simplify it as much as possible. To start with, let's try to define the problem a bit. So with landfill, we understand approximately 92 million tons of textiles.
That's right.
Waste are generated annually around the world, 85% of which ends up in landfill, which is like 5% of the whole landfill that is available. Very big problem, right?
Right.
But if we dissect the problem, let's simplify into 2 kinds of waste, one synthetic, one natural. The synthetic waste can remain in landfill for absolutely decades, right? And it will not decompose. When it decomposes, it will form microplastics, which gets released into the environment, and it got its own problems associated with that.
Right.
When you come to natural products, it decomposes a bit faster, but it creates methane, carbon dioxide. Typically, you get around 45% to 60% of methane, which directly contributes towards global warming. right? And the potential of methane to contribute to global warming is many times higher than carbon dioxide. So really not a good solution. You also asked me about incineration. Incineration, again, it varies whether you are doing natural or synthetic, but typically it releases chemicals like dioxins and carbon dioxide, which contributes directly to global warming. So really what we have to do is produce less waste. It's not sustainable to keep on carrying on doing what we always did.
Parik, you mentioned that, recycling, upcycling textile is, you haven't mentioned it, but, I was just going through your work and realizing that the keywords today that we're talking about are recycling and upcycling textile, and it's becoming a growing business too. Yeah. Can you share a few examples of successful companies in this area?
If you permit me, before I go into that, I'll try to expand on that philosophy a bit, if you are okay with it.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah.
So, yes, recycling and upcycling is a very important element of this jigsaw puzzle. But through this podcast and through other platforms that we have, we are really keen to advocate for use less, use better.
Right.
What that means is our real problem statement is a culture of fast fashion.
Yeah.
Where we are saying that buy a relatively cheap product, use it for a less amount of time and then discard it, right? If that consumer habit through sustained work is not changed, this problem is going nowhere. So the principle is use less but use quality product, and so that you can wear the same garment for a prolonged period of time, and that is the best use of resources. Now, obviously, even if we achieve that, there will be a need for recycling and upcycling. So what that will require throughout the world, right, is to really create facilities where a framework can be created, how to recycle what waste. Means, in layman term, wool is relatively easier to recycle compared to other complex fibers. It also depends how you recycle it. So there are chemical recycling, biological recycling, mechanical recycling with advantages and disadvantages.
Right.
But from a policy perspective, we should really put more resources around the world to understand how the waste can become materials for the future in a way that from life cycle analysis, we can prove that it actually contributes to the betterment of the society rather than take resources out from a circular system.
So, Parik, essentially what you're saying is that this constant urge to have variety in my wardrobe is something that I will have to reverse in my habit, because what you're actually suggesting is quite against the trend where, let's say, social media is there. I have to put up like 3 videos in a day, and I cannot be putting up 3 videos in the same, pair of clothes. So that constant urge to have a different look, because I would say, aesthetics demand it. You are basically saying that the fashion statement should be opposite to what we conceive of as of now. It should be whoever is actually holding on to his or her garments for a longer period of time is way cooler than somebody who's constantly changing it.
That's totally the point. So that is the change in culture that people who can really influence, people like you, I genuinely believe that you should advocate for that. It's cool to wear good clothing, but that I can keep on wearing. What's wrong with wearing a cloth 3 times? It shows that you care for the environment. You care for the world we live in.
Right. Yeah, so all that trolling that comes in the comment section that you don't have any more clothes should become, your talking points, that you're very consciously, very, very climate aware, and that's why you're doing it. So yes, that will become a fashionable statement. But Parik, I would want you to, develop on that point where few successful companies are actually using this model of recycling and upcycling textiles as their business model, and it's constantly growing.
One thing that is coming up very fast, very clear, is a wardrobe that you can hire, right? So you can hire your clothes. Means there are so many organizations in the UK now where rented clothes, right? That might be a compromise position where you are renting a cloth, you are reusing it that way, so on and so forth. So that also prolongs a garment's life, right? So what I mean is opportunities around that space, which is called pre-loved clothes, is something I think that business will grow exponentially over time. Right? And opportunities around that will be really important. Now, saying that, I'm a textile scientist, so I'm really interested in knowing, and I have various projects that I'm working on where we are taking clothing and try to understand how we can either recycle it in a circular way, so keeping the properties intact, or we can upcycle it when some material are not good enough for textiles. For example, I don't want to be too technical, but when the fiber length goes down or the quality of the material, we call it the degree of polymerization, goes down, what we can do with this material? Can cellulose cotton, can cellulose be converted to a form, say cellulose acetate, and can we use it to make our glasses, right? Through that, so on and so forth. So those are upcycling, right? But there will be a lot of traffic and entrepreneurship opportunities that will come out of all those research.
And since we're talking about entrepreneurship, there are many budding entrepreneurs who are tuned in and they're looking forward to some tips from you. If they want to start a business in textile recycling or upcycling, what are the 3 tips, Parik, that you would want to give to them?
One is, the biggest tips will be, try to look into the opportunities that you have around the circular economy, which is coming up. Try to be creative. To motivate you, what I can say is, if you look at fashion and textiles ecosystem in the UK, 85% of the companies, it can be more actually, I'm giving a conservative figure, 85% companies are either small, medium scale industries or micro companies with 9 or less than 9 employees. So to be in this space and to grow organically, you need to understand the ecosystem and you need to interact with the ecosystem, talk with people. There are so many industry associations who are there to help. Be part of the ecosystem rather than trying to change the world on your own. It's always a team sports.
Right. Parik, that's very interesting. And I was, about to ask you, as an individual, what can I do? One point you've made very clear, that as an individual, I've got to start with my wardrobe and pledge to myself that I am not going to buy many. It has to be some, and quality. I have to pick the right stuff so that it lasts longer. But apart from that, what else can I do as an individual to reduce the amount of textile waste?
You can review, and that is another very important point. You can review that at what temperature you wash your clothes. What temperature is recommended that you wash your clothes? Means
how would that help?
It helps a lot, because if you wash it at a lower temperature, the energy consumption is significantly lower. Hence, all the points with global warming.
Right.
You will save money.
Wow.
You will, and the damage to the clothes will be less. You will create less microfibers. So there are so many touch points where you can change your habit and you can make a huge difference to the world we live in. Now, another point I'll say, right? Another difference that you can make is to promote this philosophy that less is better.
Right.
If you are really motivated about it, then try to lobby for that.
Right.
Because this is our planet and we need to know how to sustain it, right?
That's absolutely right. It has to begin at home. As they say, charity begins at home. It has to start with me. And it definitely will. That's a promise, Parik. My last question to you is, how can fashion brands and retailers play a bigger role in promoting recycling and sustainable practices?
So there is a lot of initiatives going on around the world. In UK, I'll suggest your viewers, listeners, to look at an initiative called Textiles 2030, which is where you can see that in UK there are some pointers that we are trying to achieve as an ecosystem. Retailers, manufacturers, all are part of that, which goes around save X amount of carbon dioxide emission and X amount of water in this ecosystem. To achieve that, the consumers, the manufacturers, the retailers are all working as a team, right?
Wow.
So the way I see it, and I assume a lot of your listeners are cricket fans. So I see it as the retailers as a batsman and consumers as a bowler. You can only win if you work together.
Oh yes, as a team we'll have to perform. As a team we must be aware that if we don't begin today, then we are actually making our very own future a little bleak for us, and we pledge not to go that way. Thank you so much, Parik, for helping us understand how we can cool it down.
Thank you so much.
If you're all set and ready to stitch a greener future together, I have somebody very exciting coming up. Let your entrepreneurial streak run and get inspired, because we have Gigi Mathews, Country Director, India and VU. Welcome to Cool It Down.
Thank you for having me over, Saima. Looking forward to this podcast.
Gigi, very important, questions that we have in our minds, and you are just the best person to address them. As an entrepreneur, how can entrepreneurs help solve the problem of textile waste, especially in countries like India?
When we talk about India, we're talking about emerging economies, right? So I love saying this whenever we talk about India being an emerging economy, especially when we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, because India's startup and entrepreneurial ecosystem has become a global powerhouse.
That's right.
So I believe the strength of its entrepreneurship ecosystem signals a definite transition towards becoming a fully developed economy. So having said that, and especially for NVU, where entrepreneurship is at the heart of solving environmental problems, the role that entrepreneurs play at solving the problems of textile waste can probably be summarized in three key areas. One is innovative waste solutions. So entrepreneurs can develop scalable models that turn textile waste into valuable resources. Take, for example, the Good Felt, which is an entrepreneurial venture that uses low-value post-consumer waste to make high-quality felt that can be used for packaging and acoustic solutions. This has never been done before because felt is a low-value product actually in the country. So that is something that, is a powerful example to use. The other is community engagement, which is also my favorite to quote.
Interesting.
Entrepreneurs in emerging markets have the ability to connect with local communities, which of course then foster inclusive solutions. Now, this brings to mind a venture called Second Spin or Retex, because they work with the waste picker community in Bangalore to make hotel linen circular. In India, you don't hear about it, right? What do hotels do with their waste, their waste linens, end-of-life linens, right? So ventures like this aim at creating sustainable livelihoods while addressing environmental issues. And of course, one important thing I'd like to mention is technology and data. It's everywhere. So leveraging technology, entrepreneurs can optimize textile production and waste management. So when you look at monitoring textile flows, predicting waste hotspots, identifying inefficiencies can help reduce waste, of course, at its source. And these are some of the key roles that I see that entrepreneurs can play.
Gigi, that's so interesting that, you have actually put it in points. And one thing that's surely coming to my mind is that we need to start thinking also about where rather than what. We have been thinking what we are, what we are wearing, what we are eating, what we are watching, but we also have to start thinking on where it's going after, we are done with it. So that's very interesting. With your background in big climate projects, what similarities do you see between restoring landscapes and solving the textile waste problem through new ideas?
So there are several key parallels, between managing landscape regeneration and, of course, addressing textile waste. Very important. Both require systemic change, multi-stakeholder collaboration, and, of course, innovative solutions, right? So let me bring about two, efforts that align on these 2 points, right? One is, again, I keep using this word all the time, systemic approach. So both involve addressing deeply rooted systemic challenges. So in landscape regeneration, the goal is to restore ecosystems by tackling issues like soil degradation, deforestation, and of course, biodiversity loss, right? Similarly, textile waste crisis requires a systemic overhaul of how textiles are produced, consumed, and disposed of.
Right.
Of course, with a focus on, you're reducing waste, you're closing the loop through circular economy models. Now, both efforts demand solutions that go beyond surface level fixes.
That's right.
Second most important thing is collaboration across sectors. Now, just as landscape regenerative projects involve collaboration with farmers, governments, corporations, local communities, very important. So textile waste also requires a multi-stakeholder approach. So you're engaging with manufacturers, policymakers, consumers, waste management systems. So what you're doing is then creating solutions that work at every stage of the value chain.
Right.
Now, for us at NVU, collaboration is key to scaling impact.
Right. So we are coming back to the entire theory of circular economy, and that's how we have to look at it, from the point of view of collaboration, because that is where we will be able to optimize on our efforts and systemic approach, as you've put it so brilliantly. Gigi, what business opportunities do you see in India's textile recycling sector, and how can we motivate people to adopt sustainable practices?
Yeah, so opportunities exist across the value chain, right? So I can discuss a few, whether it's from waste collection and sorting to innovative recycling technologies and upcycled products. But let's discuss a few, right? Because I'd also like, along with the opportunity, to also talk about, what are the incentives, right? How can we actually encourage this? Especially people talk about India's textile recycling and upcycling sector to be underdeveloped. Right? So these are a few, pointers that I'd like to bring forward. So one is, of course, there is a growing need for advanced recycling technologies that can handle mixed textile waste. So which often, includes a blend of natural and synthetic fibers. Entrepreneurs can focus on developing or adopting mechanical and chemical recycling methods, of course, tailored to India's diverse waste streams. Now, in this area, incentivizing investment in R&D for recycling technologies, it could be through tax breaks, grants, access to funding, offering subsidies. Another important thing is upcycling ventures in circular fashion, right? So upcycling waste into value-added products is a growing global trend, and that should be expanded in India. We hear about it a lot outside of India, but we really need to encourage this within India. So for this, I'm thinking awareness campaigns and certifications such as, say, eco-friendly or fair trade can increase consumer demand for upcycling products. Then the other thing that I mentioned earlier on, which was waste collection and sorting services. Now, one of the biggest challenges in India's textile recycling sector is the collection and sorting of textile waste. So here, entrepreneurs can create ventures that work with, of course, local communities and informal waste pickers. And this is to establish more organized waste collection systems, right? So over here, what would really work is if we look at incentivizing informal sector workers, such as waste pickers, you formalize their roles. You look at better wages, better working conditions, providing training, capacity building, access to microfinance. And also one important part is, of course, engagement of formal and informal stakeholders. Whether you're engaging both formal, which is large textile companies, brands, manufacturers, and of course, informal stakeholders, which are waste pickers, small recyclers. And so this is a collaborative effort, which is essential for scaling the textile recycling and, of course, upcycling sector. Some of the incentives that I've thought, which is being talked about a lot, for formal stakeholders, we're looking at companies that can be incentivized through EPR regulations, right?
Okay.
So you're encouraging them to take responsibility for the end of life of their products. And of course, the informal stakeholders, like I mentioned before, you're supporting them, encouraging them, maybe through government-led social security schemes or training programs, or providing them an inclusion in the formal waste management networks. These are a few.
Right. Gigi, you have put it also in such an organized way and very, very clear for our understanding. But I want to ask you this, being an entrepreneur, working for climate sustainability, what are the challenges? What are the hindrances? What are those weak points which come in the way of any entrepreneur who's trying to marry, the passion with the idea of also earning a livelihood? Which is that point where he or she might feel that, it's not working, and you want to tell him or her, stay put, it's all going to be all right?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, right? Because when you are solving, social and environmental issues, where it's just not about social impact, but you also have to, make that profit, right?
Yeah.
So at the crux of it is that you're building something that serves people and planet. You're building something where, your children inherit tomorrow, right? And sometimes this journey is longer. I have seen, when you're building something mainstream, though I believe anything within the world of sustainability is also mainstream, but the world talks this way, where software companies that are built are mainstream, anything sustainable are, hey, that's something that's going to take longer. It needs the same tools. But, today the conversation of sustainability and building these kind of ventures are now no more in, it's in the boardrooms. It's no more a CSR activity. And I think these projects do take longer, like you mentioned, right? Entrepreneurs see the challenge of how they don't have access to funding. They don't have access to networks. They don't have access to capacity. They don't have access to mentors and coaches, because most of the time they're pioneers. They're bringing forward a solution that, really has never been tried before, right? And it's solving a problem, and it can really create a better world out there. And I think some of the things that, really helps is to build that network, to see whether within the ecosystem that, we could have platforms, we could have convenings, we could have also, when it comes to funding, to have more investors that understand how this needs to be, the journey of an entrepreneur in this field, right, can take longer. Can there be, catalytic capital, patient capital? There's so many, things that can really help them. And let me tell you, the journey is lonely and being envied, right? That is building entrepreneurial ventures. Some of the lessons that can be applied also in terms of how you do this, right? One is you always start with system change thinking, right? Then you're creating scalable and replicable models. Make sure you're fostering multi-stakeholder collaboration. And then, there are certain tools that help you, like human-centric design or, the power of networks. These are some thoughts that come up on that.
Right. They've got to just almost ignore that word philanthropic that world, throws at you when you do such a thing, out of the window, and just stay focused. I think entrepreneurs also need to understand that while they are pursuing and actually making their way in for a very large and very, very important cause, they're also supposed to play the role of educators and make people aware. My last question to you, Gigi, is what's one simple cool it down tip you would give to entrepreneurs?
So I'm going to share some NDU wisdom with you today. And it's something that's been a way of life with us in NDU. We're a 20-year-old organization building these ventures from the ground, right? Don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast, learn quickly. Don't be afraid to kill your darlings.
Wow.
Which means learn and pivot quickly. Do not stick to one idea because you believe it's the best. Quick learning and lean testing has been crucial for NDU. I mean, I could say a lot more about this, but I think very quickly that's a tip that I hope is gonna stay within the mindset of people building ventures.
I'm gonna just add one more and just keep smiling as beautifully as Gigi is doing while reading out all those tips. Thank you so much, Gigi, for joining us on Cool It Down. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Saima, for having me over.
It's not just the need of the hour, but that's the way we should be. We've got to make it fashionable to create a sustainable future, to be mindful consumers. Such simple things we can do to cool it down, like we have to rethink fashion choices, recycle or upcycle textile, ignite the entrepreneur in us as there are immense opportunities in textile recycling. Let's make it our business to cool it down. That's all for now. This is Saima signing off from this episode and leaving you with loads of ideas and things to do today, but with a promise to be back with many more climate connections, business ideas and takeaways to cool it down. Make sure you check back soon.
Cool it down. Let's make it our business.